If you operate a commercial vehicle, maintain a pipeline, or navigate a vessel, your job carries a specific legal designation, a safety-sensitive role. This means your performance has a direct, immediate effect on the physical safety of other people. Every shift you work and every decision you make carries actual physical weight. When a billing error happens in an office, it costs a company time and money. The consequences are real, but they are recoverable. When impaired performance occurs in a safety-sensitive role, the consequences are immediate, irreversible, and fatal. A single error impacts the worker, the passengers, the surrounding communities, and everyone sharing the road. Before 1966, there was no unified federal testing framework to manage this risk. Workplace substance testing in the United States was largely unregulated, inconsistent, and left entirely to the discretion of individual employers. Federal oversight of transportation was scattered across multiple departments. Aviation was handled by the Federal Aviation Agency. Surface transportation, including trucking, fell under the Interstate Commerce Commission. Maritime operations belonged to the Coast Guard. This fragmentation meant safety oversight was inconsistent. The agencies managing these transportation sectors were not primarily safety organizations. Safety protocols were constantly competing with the economic and regulatory priorities of these scattered departments. The legislative response was the Department of Transportation Act of 1966, which consolidated these disparate functions into a single cabinet-level department, with safety as its explicit central mission. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the act into law, officially beginning the department's operations in April of 1967. This consolidation established a clear principle. Transportation safety is a federal responsibility requiring coordinated oversight, rather than an afterthought left to individual agencies with competing interests. Creating the Department of Transportation did not automatically mandate substance testing. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, testing was still left to the discretion of individual employers. Some had internal policies, many did not. During this period, the commercial transportation sector underwent massive expansion. More trucks on highways, more freight on rail lines, and more flights meant more workers in safety-sensitive positions, and a higher probability that impaired performance would result in catastrophic outcomes. On January 4, 1987, a Conrail locomotive crew failed to stop at a signal outside of Chase, Maryland. The locomotive entered the main line and was struck by an Amtrak passenger train traveling at 120 miles per hour. 16 people died. Toxicological testing later confirmed the train crew had used marijuana prior to their shift. 2 years later, the Exxon Valdez ran aground on Bly Reef in Alaska, spilling 11 million gallons of crude oil. The Coast Guard investigation documented that the vessel's captain had a blood alcohol content above the legal limit at the time of the grounding. This pattern extends beyond illicit drugs and alcohol. In 2003, the Staten Island ferry crashed into a maintenance pier at full speed, killing 11 passengers after the assistant captain lost consciousness from a prescription opioid painkiller. The modern testing regulations govern your work today because voluntary, fragmented employer policies proved insufficient. The rules exist as a direct legislative response to a documented history of preventable fatalities. The federal government responded to this casualty record by passing the Omnibus Transportation Employee Testing Act of 1991. Following years of investigations, congressional hearings, and urgent recommendations from the National Transportation Safety Board, President George H.W. Bush signed the act into law. The act established a clear mandate. It directed the Department of Transportation to establish comprehensive drug and alcohol testing programs across all transportation modes. This mandate emerged from heavy debate. Labor unions recognized the need for worker safety, but resisted testing as an intrusion on worker privacy and a mechanism for disciplinary action that bypassed collective bargaining protections. To balance those concerns, the act included a second crucial requirement. It directed the Department of Health and Human Services to establish strict standards for drug testing laboratories. This requirement created the SAMHSA certified laboratories. Today, these highly regulated facilities process every single federal workplace drug test. A failed test result carries severe legal and employment consequences. It can permanently alter your career. Therefore, the result must be produced by a laboratory that meets a documented, audited, and mathematically precise standard. By combining mandatory testing with scientific rigor, the 1991 Omnibus Act ensured that while the public was protected, workers were shielded from improperly conducted or unscientific testing. The entire federal testing framework is built on a common regulatory foundation known as 49 CFR Part 40. These baseline rules are executed and enforced by 6 distinct modal agencies within the DOT. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA, covers commercial vehicle operators, including CDL holders. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, regulates flight crews, air traffic controllers, and aviation maintenance. The Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, handles train crews and signal employees. The Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, covers transit operators, mechanics, and armed security at federally funded agencies. The Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, oversees regulated gas and hazardous liquid pipelines. The United States Coast Guard covers crew members on regulated commercial vessels. If your job falls into any of these 6 pillars, your testing program is federally mandated. These requirements apply regardless of your specific employer's internal policy, your union contract, or the state you work in. To execute this safety mandate, the DOT program relies on 6 highly specific categories of testing that span an employee's entire career. Pre-employment testing is the mandatory baseline. Before you can begin performing safety-sensitive functions for an employer, you must pass this test to confirm you are fit for duty. Random testing serves as the system's primary deterrent. You are subject to unannounced testing throughout your employment, driven by a scientifically valid selection process where every worker in the pool has an equal chance of being chosen. Reasonable suspicion testing requires a trained supervisor to make specific, documented, and contemporaneous observations regarding your appearance, behavior, speech, or body odor. Post-accident testing is automatically triggered based on specific damage or injury thresholds following an incident. It is required to determine whether substance impairment was a contributing factor. Finally, return to duty and follow-up testing. If you record a violation, you are required to complete a heavily monitored evaluation process and pass directly observed tests before you can resume your duties. These 6 checkpoints ensure the federal safety standard is consistently applied from the day a worker applies for a job until the day they retire. Not every job involving heavy equipment falls under federal jurisdiction. It is critical to know exactly what framework governs your specific role. If you work in a safety-sensitive position that falls outside those 6 modal agencies, you are in a non-DOT role. Your testing program is governed by your employer's specific policy and local state law, rather than federal mandate. This distinction matters when a violation occurs. Under non-DOT jurisdiction, a positive test is managed internally by the company's Human Resources Department. Under DOT jurisdiction, the consequences escalate. For example, if you hold a CDL, an FMCSA violation is permanently recorded in the Federal Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. Despite these severe consequences, federal law strictly protects the confidentiality of all DOT test results. They cannot be released to law enforcement without a valid legal process, nor can they be shared with other unauthorized employers without your consent. Understanding your regulatory jurisdiction is your first operational responsibility. Now that the foundation is set, we will examine exactly how this federal reporting system tracks your record.